Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Music Rating, Ranking, and Reviewing podcast I like to call Music Meltdown, in which we rate, rank, and review any artist discography, songs, musical topics, really whatever comes to mind. This episode going into the 90s with one of the biggest bands of the emerging jam band scene, of course, talking about the rather divisive Dave Matthews Band. And I've mentioned Tastes Like Music more than a fair times on here, so figure why not get one of the guys who's well versed in Dave Matthews Band. Above me, Joseph Staggerwald. What was your familiarity with the Dave Matthews Band kicking into this?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here. And my familiarity with Dave goes back to 98. Um, Before These Crowded Streets was the first album I ever got with my own money. First CD I ever bought. Um, my mom actually got me two records, Beck's Odelay, and she actually got me Madman Across the Water by Elton John, but I wasn't ready for that yet. So I was like, can I exchange the Elton for some Dave? Because Dave was like one of the first artists I had gotten into. My cousin had their CD, and I was like, okay, I like this. I want to get this. I want to be a Dave guy. So a lot of experience with Dave. I've never been to a Dave Matthews concert. I've never even thought about going really like that. The jam band scene, not my scene. So I'm one of these few probably weirdos who's not aligned with like going to concerts to see Dave, but just likes Dave for his music. So, and I remain a Dave fan to this day. I still listen to the CDs and Before These Crowded Streets and Crash. And maybe one other thing would be in my top five for album of the year.
Interesting. That being said, I was not very well versed in Dave, and I really only knew about Dave due to your dire situation in 1998. I did a thing where I listened to and I ranked all of the albums from your Album of the Year series, and Before These Crowded Streets was obviously a part of that. It was actually one of the first five or six I think I listened to because I was going through randomizing them. And I was pleasantly surprised by it. I tried to listen to Crash not too long after, and I was unpleasantly not surprised by not liking that one. So I kind of backed away from Dave. I always loved the song Stay, but it really wasn't until I was just looking around and figured I like this record. It's fairly short. I heard that the new one came out, so I thought, this could be an interesting artist to do because I knew that I had some familiarity with them in the past. So I figured to throw it onto the roster. That being said, I've now listened to all 10 of these records at least once, have my opinions and notes written down, and it was an interesting experience. Definitely the furthest act in regards to sort of a jam scene that I've done, and probably will do if I'm being honest. Maybe Grateful Dead at some point, but yeah, we'll see. That being said, you want to kick us off with your number 10 Dave Matthews Band record?
Yes, I will. This one, I believe you called it. My number 10 is gonna be Stand Up from 2005. And this was sort of the when I was a Dave, more into the Dave scene and following Dave, this one came after Busted Stuff, which was a return to sort of the Steve Lillywhite kind of era, which came after Every Day, which was sort of their play for big pop radio and stuff. Unfortunately, Stand Up is like Every Day, but with even less hooks. It's very like John Mayer soft rock, but like not even John Mayer level. Like all the good things that I like about Dave, which is everyone but Dave. I like Dave, but like everyone other than Dave is sort of on a higher level for me. Dave's there. I think he's a decent songwriter. He's an okay singer. I don't hate his voice or anything like that. But Dave's not really why I listen to Dave Matthews Band. Like I love the violin. I love Boyd Tinsley, and I think Carter Beauford's an incredible drummer, and Stefan Lassard's an incredible bass player, and Leroy Moore is an incredible sax and flutist and everything else. And this like strips all those things away, and you get something just really generic sounding, to be honest. A song like American Baby, which was the hit from the record, is just so boring. Um, and it's just, this record really killed my interest in the band. Uh, and no Steve Lillywhite, so you don't have the great production, and it's just, you know, not a good record. I think it's probably the lowest rated that most people are going to have. So it is easily down at the bottom, and the only record I think from them that I just will never listen to again. I wouldn't have listened to it except for, I have to for the ranking, but it is one I just stay away with, or stay away from completely.
Makes you sit down whenever this one comes up, I suppose. But yeah, that's my bottom as well. Stand Up. And yeah, just a massive letdown this record was. A bit of a spoiler, I really liked the record Busted Stuff, and I was excited because they were getting back into that Steve Lillywhite, more big band arrangement style. But they went back to the schlocky pop of every day, but it's even weaker on the songwriting front, which I figure I'll get it out of the way. Dave is not the strongest songwriter. He fits the music, but generally speaking, I'm not going to put him up there with like a Dylan or like a Paul Simon or somebody. It's not quite there yet. But I don't know. The arrangements here feel less engaged, and it's like the tracks were designed to be just more baseline and sort of more radio ready. On the whole, as well, I think it's very weakly produced. Both this and Everyday just are not great sounding records. I mean, there's some especially lousy moments on Stand Up, Dream Girl, and Everybody Wake Up, which none of them really did a ton for me. I don't know. I have this one at 2.5 stars. I feel like this record is about how I would view people who don't like Dave Matthews Band. It's just really boring. They're always jamming. There's not enough memorable about the songs, and it just kind of goes nowhere. So yeah, at the bottom for me, going to be Stand Up, 2.5 stars for that one. Not great.
Yeah, that is my rating as well. I didn't mention that, but yeah, it's a 2.5, which for me is pretty low. It's hard to get a 2.5 for a band that I really like Dave Matthews. So pretty disappointing effort there. All right, well, my number 9, and this is where it gets interesting for me. I have a couple records at 3 stars. My number 9, though, is going to be Come Tomorrow from 2018. And for Dave, it just sort of, the band kept kind of coming apart. After Leroy Moore's death, I think it was like 2010-ish. And by this time, 2018, Boyd Tinsley's out of the band because apparently he's some like weird sex pest or predator or something. I'm not sure exactly what the story is, but he had been kicked out of the band by now. And really, it's like the Dave Matthews show. And I think, as I explained during the stand up review, that's just not what I love about Dave Matthews. And you still got Carter on drums, you still got Stephen Lessard on bass, and they're both great players. But it just seems like their roles kind of get pushed more and more in the background, and you don't get those awesome fills, and you don't get those jazzy bass lines. And it's kind of just like Dave Matthews and Tim Reynolds like goofing around on guitar and writing decent songs that don't stand up to their earlier stuff. I think Dave is a pretty good songwriter musically. Lyrically, I mean, he has some real stinkers. He can't write a damn about sex at all. He is one of the worst. Every time he tries to like bring in like some like body little phrase or something, like it just comes off so awkward. And there's a couple examples that I'll speak of later. And on these later albums, he kind of tones that down, but I just don't really care what he's singing about on Come Tomorrow. Samurai Cop, Let Joy Begin is decent. It's got a decent hook, and there's some nice electric guitar on here. Tim Reynolds plays some good stuff, but I don't know. Dave seems like he's over singing a little bit. The reliance on the guitar makes it a little more anonymous, and the songs just, they don't have like that magical quality of, hey, I've never heard that before in a rock song like the early stuff does. So This one's a 3 stars for me. It's okay, but it's why would you listen to this when there's, those early Dave records that you could get into?
Yeah, I echo most of those sentiments, although I have a couple of records before that one. Not really sure how people feel about this one. I've heard some people call it a bit of a return to form. Number nine is going to be the new one, Walk Around the Moon. I don't know. I have very similar complaints on this record as I will another one, so I'm gonna kind of keep that brief at the moment. But on the whole, I think that's fairly solid. The arrangements are nice with a couple of decent tracks. Generally speaking, for all of these records, they're very professionally made, well constructed. The songs are incredibly well crafted. However, it just sort of lacks highlights within what they're actually playing here. I definitely think the passing of Leroy did a toll on the band because he was sort of the standout for me there for a while. Absolutely loved his work. So I think that they were able to rebound pretty well on the first couple, but things are just sort of going downhill as they keep going on. I think Break Free was definitely the standout here, but past that, it's just sort of decent. I wouldn't complain if somebody was listening to it, but at the same time, this year's kind of sucked, and this is far from a highlight for it. So 3 stars for Walk Around the Moon.
Well, we can keep talking about Walk Around the Moon because
Right.
that's my number 8. So it seems like we're pretty much on the same page. And I echo what you said. It's another one kind of like Come Tomorrow, but this one has even less like electric guitar. I think Tim Reynolds did a pretty good job on Come Tomorrow, sort of livening things up. This one feels even more like just a Dave Matthews solo project. And it's just, I don't know, not what I want in Dave. It's soft, it's a little slackery, a little too guy with acoustic guitar strumming along for me. And I don't want to like rag on Dave's songwriting more, but he just has, I don't know if he's lost his ability to write like those catchy hooks or if it was because he's lost Leroy and Boyd. But these songs just feel just very anonymous. And, he was I think lyrically sometimes he doesn't get enough credit back in the early days when he's talking about like apartheid and stuff like that. There's some interesting lyrics that he brings in. And on this, it just doesn't feel like he's really singing about anything anymore. And he's, just singing about, I don't know, rocker old guy stuff. Like nothing on here stands out. Madman's Eyes has like that Middle Eastern cliched rock sound to it. And it sounds good. It sounds very well made, but it's almost like too sterile, and it's missing that like Steve Lillywhite magic to make like Dave and his guitar more than that. And I think it's a fine album. It's 3 stars for me, but I was a little disappointed from what I heard. It just feels, I don't know, like an unnecessary extension of Dave Matthews Band when it could just be Dave Matthews.
Yeah, agree with most of that because I said most of it as well. So, but yeah, moving up from here, definitely. I like how we've already just sort of alluded to the disappointment of Steve Lillywhite's lack of involvement with some of these records. But next up for me, definitely a turning point for the band because this was the first one without Steve Lillywhite, going with Every Day. This is the big disappointment of the catalog because losing Steve Lillywhite, they just didn't know, whoever they brought on just didn't know how to produce this band. Uh, what Steve Lillywhite did, I think, is he was able to really showcase the band in a brilliant way, have them sort of be in the forefront, just feel like the group is playing to you, while more so on here, it feels like the opposite has happened. Dave is right in front and center. You get more of his acoustics. He's there, and it's just I want more of the horns. I want more of the keys. I want more of the drums and the bass. I just want less of Dave, which is sad because it's his band, but you're the least talented member of it. I don't know. It doesn't help that the songs here are also pretty hit or miss. The opener, I Did It, definitely starts things out on a really sour note. Did not care for that song. But there are some good tracks. When the World Ends, So Right, Angel. I don't know. This one and my following record, I have at pretty low 3.5 stars. Uh, they're like on the borderline 3.5. I feel like if this one was produced a little bit finer and maybe had a bit tighter focus within the songwriting, it could have been a great follow-up to Before These Crowded Streets. But sadly, you lose Steve Lillywhite, so it just has to plummet to number 8 every day.
Okay, well, that's my number 7. So again, we seem to be pretty much on the same page. And my gosh, I was really, I mean, Dave Matthews was my favorite band in, let me see, February 26, 2001. Dave was probably my favorite band. This album was released February 27th, 2001, and I wanted to like it. I really did. I tried. I thought the singles were pretty decent. The space between is nice, like it's pretty. The bridge on Everyday, I think, is one of my favorite parts of his whole catalog. Unfortunately, the rest of the song's kind of weak, but I would just listen to it just to get that bridge where it rises up and it gets big. And I think it's a gorgeous bridge. I did it. That single came out a while before the album, and I was okay with it. I didn't love the direction, but I didn't hate it. But I think looking back now, obviously Glenn Ballard was just the wrong choice as producer, especially after, we now know Busted Stuff and how it appeared and came out the next year and kind of brought it back to what Dave people like about Dave. And I agree with what you said. Like, Dave is just, there's too much Dave on this record. Like, Glenn Ballard obviously was like, hey, we got to strip down some of these violins and sax and all this interesting stuff. Let's just put it all on your shoulders, Dave. You better bring the goods. And he didn't bring the goods because I just don't think he has it in him to carry a band. Um, and this is kind of what he has to do on this album, because all that periphery, all those fun sounds and those interesting, unique sounds are stripped away. And you just get Dave mostly with acoustic, a lot more electric on here. And it's just the wrong sound for him. It's just, whatever they were thinking. And they were already incredibly popular. Like, they had been selling millions and millions of records. So I don't know why they decided to go in this like generically commercial direction. But I think they realized it was the wrong choice. We now know it's the wrong choice. Um, and it's just not a great record. When the World Ends is decent. It has some really bad lyrics, though. Um, really, I'm going to tie you up like a baby in a carriage car. Your legs won't work because you want me so. You just lie spread to the wall. Like that, those are the sexy lyrics that Dave loves to throw out there that are just so aw. And I love like the way it sounds, but then Dave comes in with that verse and it's just like, Jesus, Dave, like, come on, like you got to be able to do better than that. So it's got like the same problems, the weak lyrics. So yeah, just a big disappointment. It's really like 3 stars. I thought about upgrading it to 3.5, but I think it's a 3-star record from Dave still.
Out on the borderline for me. Definitely the worst thing to happen in 2001 there was the fall of Dave Matthews Band.
Definitely the worst thing of 2001.
For sure. Moving up from there, gearing up to have the same top 6, because my number 7 is Come Tomorrow. And I did not know what to do with this album. Very close between this and Everyday. Once again, very low 3.5. Top 6, I'm bumping up to 4 stars for all of those. Really liked them. But I don't know. This one I have it above Everyday, mainly just for the highs. I thought Samurai Cop, Can't Stop, She, as well as Idea of You are all pretty strong songs. But this one just feels very by the books. It's like a computer generated Dave Matthews Band album. You got decent arrangements, solid vocal performances, they're well written. It just happens to lack the identity that most of their better records had. And it's really only above Everyday because it doesn't have the really bad production of the other record. I don't know. They're really close, neck and neck. It's just far from one of their peaks. So I don't know. Number 6, no, number 7, Come Tomorrow. It's not nothing to say about that one either.
Yeah, it's kind of just there. I forget that it exists often. All right, my number six. I'm gonna go with the Steve Lillywhite produced album, but it's the one from 2012, Away from the World, which, when you listen to it, even if you didn't know Steve Lillywhite came back to produce, you hear the first song, Broken Things, and you know Steve Lillywhite's back. Instruments sound great. The violin is rich. Boyd Tinsley sounds fantastic. The guitars sound better. Everything just sounds better with Steve Lillywhite producing the band. And the only thing that's missing are those top level songs. I think there's some good songs here. Broken Things is great, great pop melody. Love the sound of the acoustic guitars, of course. Lily White is a master of the acoustic guitar sound. So that sounds great. Um, Dave sounds good. I think his voice sounds better on these albums with Steve at the helm. And it's just a nice return to form for Dave Matthews. Belly Belly Nice is sort of that cliched like big horn song. You got this funky kind of jangled stop start electric guitars. The lyrics are a little saucy, it's Dave doing his kind of weird, sexy, but not very sexy lyrics, but it works. It sounds good. Um, you know, I think Mercy and Gaucho and Sweet and the Riff and Bellyful and all these songs, they're good. They're not great. They're not like top level Dave songs. And so you kind of have this, the creeping suspicion that Dave Matthews just doesn't quite have it anymore really comes to a head, I think, on this album. This is after GrouGrux, so it's after Leroy Moore dies. You still have most of the band together, but it just doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel like that camaraderie and that, hey, let's see what you can do on this track. Let's see what you can do on this track is there. It feels a little more forced. And maybe Dave thought, let's focus and kind of cut out the, extraneous kind of stuff. But to me, it just feels a little more generic until you get to Rooftop, which has awesome electric violin. It's kind of like psychedelic and cosmic country. Reminds me a little bit of like Gene Clark kind of stuff. Like that's that extra thing, like that, outside of the normal bounds of rock and roll that makes Dave so special. And when they do that, it just sounds so good. And they don't do it enough on these later albums, I feel like. It's just an incredible performance from Boyd Tinsley there. And I wish there was more of that. And there's not. And there's a almost 10-minute song at the end that kind of drags a little bit. So I think it's a good album. It's 3.5 stars. But if you go back at the end of like this video and see where these albums fall, like it's just like a straight kind of like downward like slant pretty much. Every day is kind of a weird like V here, but like it's just diminishing returns after diminishing returns. And unfortunately, this, even with Steve back, can't stop that diminishing return.
Yeah, didn't actually realize it was Steve Lillywhite, but I did notice that it was definitely their best in a while, which is why I'm still not talking about it. Perhaps a bit contentious with some Dave fans. My number six, I have Big Whiskey and the GrouGrux King. I think this was a solid bounce back. This came right after Stand Up, so really anything could have been a solid bounce back as long as it sounded good. This was the first record, I believe, recorded without Leroy, or he was there for part of it, then he passed. And you can kind of tell slight decline in the arrangements compared to the earlier work, but they're still very impressive. I just think that he's a bit missed across here. The acoustics, per the usual, are lovely, but I think the drums are the main highlight across this record. Despite the strong playing, however, my main issues just come down to the songs not being quite as notable on here compared to his other works. Kind of what you were saying about Away from the World. I don't know. The highs are quite good though, but just none of these are like top tier Dave Matthews songs for me. Dive In, Alligator Pie, Seven, You and Me. Those were my favorites on there. However, I am at 4 stars for it. I think that they're just a very impressive band, very fun to listen to. and I just found myself really enjoying them as a collective. So number 6, Big Whiskey and the GrouGrux King at 4 stars.
All right. Big Whiskey and GrouGrux King is my number 5, and it's at 4 stars. So we're like right in sync here, which is odd because from what I've gathered from Discord, we are rarely in sync on anything. But
Oh
hey,
yeah,
it's good to see we come together for good old Dave.
of course.
And honestly, when we started talking about doing this, I didn't think you were going to get to 4 stars. So the fact that you're at 4 stars for number 6 is pretty impressive. That's good to hear.
I mean, to be fair, I didn't think I was getting there
Yeah.
either. So
Well, you kept an open mind, and that's all you can do with Dave here.
for sure.
Yeah, Big Whiskey, no Leroy Moore. He died during the pre-production of the album, and his loss is very large. I think in the history of the band and what would come after. And it sucks because he is my favorite part of the band. Like some of his work, he brings in almost like a yacht rock feel, like that jazz yacht rock, like fusiony. He it feels like he can do anything, and without him, like the whole tenor of the band changes, and what they're good at kind of changes as well. I think there's some good songs on here. "Shake Me Like a Monkey" is fast and fun. And you got some great rambunctious trumpet from Rashawn Moore, who steps in. Feels like, Tower of Power or Phoenix horns kind of thing. It doesn't have that distinct Leroy Moore sound, but the energy's there, which is good. Another really cringy Dave Sex lyric, though, "Lick you from your back to your belly," which, like, he just drops these in there. And it's just like, Dave, come on. Like, this is a good song. Like, why do you have to mess things up with your weird sexual fixations? It's odd. I hope Phoebe Bridgers was listening though. But I think where they sort of do well on this album is to amp up the electric guitar. There's some really nice electric guitar parts from Tim Reynolds. One of the few times I really noticed him taking the lead on stuff. The drumming is ferocious and fierce throughout. I think it's excellent. Um, what I or Why I Am and Funny the Way It Is, I think are pretty decent pop songs. Why I Am has a really nice electric guitar solo. Spaceman's cool, got some banjo. Steely Dan like guitar, King of the World, in there in a little break or something. There's a little riff that sounds exactly like it. A lot of cool chord changes and stuff. It feels complex and powerful and interesting. Great rapid fire bass work from Stefan. And Squirm's great too. Got some triumphant guitars, orchestration in there. So I think they do a good job of, you can't replace Leroy Moy, but they fill out and make the songs big, and you know, they do a good job to do what they can to replace his talent. And I think it works. I like it. It's one I come back to. So 4 stars for Big Whiskey, GrouGrux King.
Nice. And my number 5, Away from the World. So same top 4. To me, pretty much everything about Big Whiskey, but I think that this one is slightly elevated. Didn't realize Steve Lillywhite was here. That explains it. I kind of view this one as being their folk rock record in a sense. The arrangements aren't as fleshed out as their prior releases. It's focusing more so on Dave and his acoustic work. It's actually good this time, so I'm happy about it. As well, the songs themselves are just very well put together. Stuff like Broken Things, Mercy, Gaucho, The Riff, and Snow Outside. They're all just excellently put together and well-crafted material. And I think it's really just what pushes the Dave Matthews Band forward, is a way to just be able to construct and sort of build out from their jamming. It really does feel like they're creating their own live show on a lot of their records, but performing it into a great studio creation. Obviously, with the assistance of Steve Lillywhite, which makes all the difference with this band. This is going to be a limb that I should not be going out on, but you could honestly probably make a claim that he's basically the George Martin of the Dave Matthews Band. So I don't know, 4 stars again for this one. Although I think it is a stronger 4 stars than Big Whiskey. So number 5, Away from the World.
All right, now we're into the classics, the classic Dave Matthews albums. It was pretty tough for me to decide the order because I think all four of these left are just very strong, good albums. I'm not going to go crazy. I'm not jumping up to 5 stars yet or anything, but I have Crash from '96 is my number four. And this one, definitely leans into the poppier sound from Under the Table and Dreaming. Um, you have So Much to Say, Too Much, Tripping Billies, Crash Into Me, which are all just really strong pop songs. So Much to Say has some, great horn work. Too Much, it's kind of a little funkier. It's got great horn work as well, great violins, and the band just sounds like they're having a lot of fun. Um, and I think they've proved on the debut that he can write a great pop song, and there's no drop in the poppiness and the I think quality of the pop songs. I think where this one is a little bit worse is the jammier stuff, the longer stuff. Number 41, is good, but it just doesn't quite compare to the best of the longer songs like Jimmy Thing and Warehouse on the first album. You have 9 minutes of Proudest Monkey at the end, which I do not care for that much. Probably the weakest song in the album. The album's about 70 minutes long, so it's a very long album. But you have Steve Lillywhite producing, you have Tom Lord Alge mixing. It sounds fantastic. The acoustic guitars sound unbelievably good. Tim Reynolds again comes in for acoustic and electric guitars. Sounds great. Um, and there's just really complex playing underneath seemingly poppy songs. And it's just a different sound. Like nobody was doing this in '96. Nobody really ever did this ever. Like this level of complexity and sophistication sort of underpinning these pop songs. It's kind of like yacht rock and Steely Dan level of just like really tight. I mean, not quite Steely Dan level, it's not crazy, but the playing and the tightness of the band and what they're doing, the little fills and the little bass work and the little drum work things, just everything comes together in this way that just I don't think anyone else was doing it. It was so uncool at the time because they weren't like headlong into punk riffs and just like boring crap like that, like all the alternative bands and stuff. Like this is really complex, well put together, great sounding music, and it was just really uncool in '96. And it's a shame because I think it's just really good music. I think it's all awesome stuff. Leroy Moore, just incredible performances, and it's 4 stars. I mean, it's like really close to 4.5, but I couldn't quite get it there with Proudest Monkey. Let You Down, Lion on Graves. It gets a little long-winded, I think, at the end, but it's a really good album.
Nice. Not going to be quite talking about that one yet. Believe I'm going to talk about what I would guess is your number two now. It's going to be Before These Crowded Streets. Of course, the record I knew going into this. And it's very similar to the two before it. I once again just feel like the general material is slightly dropping from record to record. It has the pop appeal of Crash, but I'd say the playing is a bit more experimental and the jamming is more apparent within the song structures on here. Songs are very long on this album, many of which crossing over the 7 minute mark. And you feel it. It's a 70-minute album, and every minute showcases itself. Despite that, the playing is still excellent. My favorite part of this album would be the drums, and there's just some really solid songs across here. My favorite of which being probably my favorite Dave Matthews song, being Stay. I think that's just an incredible pop hook on there, and just one of his best vocal performances because he has other people performing with him. The Stone's great, Crush as well Pig. Just a bunch of really strong material on here. I will say I think I preferred this on the first live record that you showed me. I'm blanking the name on it. I think I prefer the material slightly on there. It's a bit more lively, has a bit more energy to it, but you still get the great arrangements, the great horns and whatnot, and the female backing vocals. Regardless, it's a 4-star album, incredibly strong work. I don't know if I'd put it that high in 98, but it's very good. So number 4 before these crowd streets.
Well, I am the resident 98 hater. Worst year ever for music. Um, and Before these crowded streets is actually my number 3. Yes, even though it was, well, according to the album of the year series, it was my number 1. Dropped it down to number 3 or so for the year. And it's my third favorite Dave Matthews album as well. I think what holds it back, the length. It's really long. There's a bunch of songs that have like little extra codas of songs that like it just feels like too much sometimes. Like I know like they're a jam band, but they were a really good pop band as well. And they have some great pop songs. Rapunzel, Stay Wasting Time is excellent. Um, but they also just really stretch out on some of these things. The Last Stop, Halloween. There's kind of these angrier songs that come in, and I think that's where people really don't like Dave, is where it sounds like his mouth is like full of spit and he's like real guttural and he's it's a little much on Halloween. The track listing's a little weird. Like you have these big poppy tunes like Rapunzel, and then you have like the Middle Eastern kind of raga of The Last Stop. Then you have the dark, it's not really pop. I don't know what exactly it is, sort of jazzy, progressive pop on Don't Drink the Water, which kind of reminds me of like a Peter Gabriel 80s song, maybe updated, with Alanis Morissette playing the Kate Bush role. And then you get into Halloween where it's like really dark and Dave is just like wailing and screaming. And I could have used a couple more of the Rapunzels and the Stay Wasting Times, and maybe one less Halloween. I think Crush is amazing, though. I love Stefan Lassard's bass line. And I love the performances on here. I think every single one of them is probably them pushing themselves to the very limit of what they can do. Carter Beauford's drum work is phenomenal. Just the splashy cymbals and all those like little tricky jazz fills and stuff that he's doing. Incredible bass lines. Boyd Tinsley has some awesome violin stuff. And Tim Reynolds really does some nice electric work. Bella Fleck, some great banjo on Last Stop, and Don't Drink the Water really adds a lot to it. So, it's great, very complex, very cool stuff. It's just a little too long. And maybe my favorite 40 seconds of the whole catalog is Pentella Nagapampa, which is, it sounds like it's to me this like brilliant little pop gem. And then it ends after 40 seconds. It always pissed me off. I wanted them to keep going on that because it sounds so great. But it's the first one I listened to. I'm always going to have a soft spot in my heart for it, but I can see the flaws, and I rarely listen to the whole thing in one sitting. But I mean, I'll go back to Rapunzel and Crush all the time. But it's hard to go 70 minutes with this much kind of like jamming and just like flexing and little too much there, Dave. Rein it in a bit, buddy.
Yeah, pretty much agree to all of that. I will say, I like Don't Drink the Water, but his vocals on that track are not good near the end of it, where he is just shouting. I don't have an issue with him a lot of the time, but on there, it's just he's trying so hard. He puts a lot of passion into his performances, and his vocals are just. I don't know how well it really suits it. I don't know. I made a comparison a little bit ago because you brought up the John Mayer thing, and I actually think that they are very similar in a lot of ways vocally, except I guess John Mayer is more douchey and Dave is just trying too hard a lot of the time.
Yeah,
Regardless.
Dave does, or John, I think knows not to push it into that sort of like wailing, kind of like weird next level. Like he keeps it reined in. Dave is just like he gets a little wild with some of those vocal performances, and yeah, that gets a little cringy. Between that and the sex lyrics, I think those are the two weakest parts of the band.
For sure. And they're all rooted at Dave's, though. Guess that goes to show everything. We have the same top two, though. My number three is Crash. Did not see that one coming, but not complaining. It's not quite on the same level as Under the Table and Dreaming, but Crash takes the band to an equally impressive direction. Playing on here is still very intricate and just greatly done, with the horns and strings taking over and really just showcasing Leroy at the peak of his talents, I would say. But the drums are nothing to scoff at either. Songs seem to take more of an overt pop focus, however, having more of a radio ready sound. And this is how you do that every day. Because this one, you still have the great Steve Lillywhite production. Everything still is coming together, but you have those great pop hooks and melodies to them that you can get stuck in your head despite all the jamming and whatnot. Notably, you get those on a track like So Much to Say or Crash Into Me, which, if Crash Into Me are innuendos, those are not good. Overall, though, at its core, I think it's an impressive ensemble of musicians creating a delightfully blissful soundscape with incredible Steve Lillywhite production behind it. This one's going to be a pretty high four. Really just due to me not really getting too into Drive In, Drive Out, and the project just feeling a bit long overall. Still very enjoyable. Strong recommendation if you're able to get into it. So number three, Crash, 4 stars. And I own that one and I own Before These Crowded Streets. So have some records that I need to buy up from them. So
I bet some of these would sound great on vinyl. I don't have any on vinyl, but they seem like a band that would benefit from that kind of full, rich sound, especially the early stuff.
for sure. I was looking to buy one of theirs. I found it for like 18 on Amazon. I won't say what record that is yet, but definitely on the to-do list to get.
Well, yeah, okay. So top two the same. I think that's somewhat surprising. But I don't think it's wrong because it's the same one I have. Busted Stuff's my number two. And man, what could have been, what should have been every day. And I'm just super glad they realized their mistake and we're like, all right, let's release the Lillywhite stuff. And they changed it, like they sort of worked on it. And added whatever they wanted to do. Lillywhite doesn't produce this. Stephen Harris does, who I have no idea what he does. I've never heard of him before, so but I think he does a very nice job with the sound, with everything. It sounds very good. And these songs, which come from a time before whatever they were doing with Glenn Ballard on Every Day and ruining their sound. A lot of these came out of jams and stuff they played live, and it just boggles my mind that they decided this stuff was not like ready for an album because it's all so good. Busted Stuff is amazing. I love the little jazz workout they do at the end of that. Gray Street has some really good lyrics, I think. It has a great hook. Where Are You Going, which is the single, is softer, but I think it's pretty meaningful, and I think it's well composed. You Never Know has a great hook. Captain has a unbelievable bass line from Stefan Lessard, probably my favorite. Really nice mournful horns. I think Dave's vocal performances are probably the best that he ever does on this album. Leroy Moore, his work on Raven is incredible. That outro solo he does, that it kind of like bounds up and revs up into this like sky high, really tuneful, jazzy, awesome performance. Boyd Tinsley got some great work after being basically relegated to doing nothing on Every Day, like just completely out of the picture. Him and Leroy, they just come roaring back with a purpose on this one, and they sound great. They're totally integrated back into the sound. Like it's just such a full, rich sound when you have the acoustic guitars, the electric guitars going, and you have that violin coming in, and it's just this really cool, unique mix that you just don't get from anybody else. and you got Leroy doing the solos. It just, I love that sound. Like I want more of that sound. They deliver on this album, and they deliver an album that's only 54 minutes, which is brief for them, and it's just totally full of good songs. There's not a single like stinker or kind of weird, like awkward lyric song or anything like that. Like just really good. It's 4.5 stars. It's got some of my best, some of my favorite performances. And yeah, I'm just really super glad they saw the error of their ways of every day and released this as an actual album and didn't, make people bootleg it or some crap like that. Like they put it out there because they knew they were wrong, and this was the right thing to do.
I was just looking it up too. Stephen Harris, his producer page on Wikipedia is not very impressive. He produced a record for Ben Queller, some Codeline stuff, whoever they are. And they the most notable thing they seem to do is he's is the mix engineer for Beautiful Day and Sweetest Thing by U2. So he made okay hits for U2 in 2000. So good job. However, Busted Stuff, as well as my number two, who would have seen this one coming, is what it is. Despite there not being any Steve Lillywhite, this album feels very akin to Before These Crowded Streets to me. In many ways, feeling like the natural progression from that record. Definitely them rebounding from the worst thing that happened in 2001. The production on here is just 10 times better than on Everyday. The band is back to being the primary focus on here, but to accompany that, I think Dave is singing the best that he had up to this point in the career. He sounds really good. He's not really overdoing it. He kind of sounds like what John Mayer would later do. So I really like it. And all the songs flow into each other very well on here. It's incredibly well sequenced, I would say. There's a lot of restraint and sort of attention to detail on this, and it just allows the arrangements to breathe and just develop in the best way that they could. Title track is wonderful. I think Captain is very strong as well. My favorite song had to be the closer, Bartender. The only reason why this one is below the debut because I don't think it has quite the highlights. And weirdly enough, this one only being 54 minutes, I feel like they weren't able to pack in possibly everything that they could have, because they really did utilize those longer 90s album lengths very well, I would say. I don't know. I have this one at 4.5 stars as well. Number two, Busted Stuff. So I got two great Dave Matthews Band's records.
Who would have thought?
Not me.
That's great. Very happy to hear that. My number one, well, there's only one left. Under the Table and Dreaming, I think, is their best work. And it's one of those awkward situations where my favorite Dave Matthews song is the first song on the first album. So it's all downhill after the best of what's around. But no, this album from front to back, an excellent piece of work. Totally uncool, totally out of left field in 1994. It did not vibe with sort of the alternative scene. And I always thought it was interesting. Like people thought like Dave Matthews was so uncool and like too white. Like it was the most diverse band like in the whole, like is there a single other band in 94 that has 3 black members? Like this is like, jazz and all this other stuff coming through. Like I know Dave like takes the brunt of it because he's the white guy at the front, but as far as like introducing like soul and jazz and sort of other types of music, I think this was totally a standout in 94. So the critics can suck it or whatever, idiots. I think this is just a beautiful record. Steve Lillywhite's production is absolutely phenomenal for 1994. And this, nobody was doing this. A sax solo from Leroy Moore. Like who's doing a long ass sax solo on your, on your albums in 94? And they were selling millions and millions of copies, and a bunch of hippies eating granola and stuff listening to this. But to me, it feels like a logical extension of like yacht rock and jazz rock and like that 70s sound. You got Boyd Tinsley's awesome violin work all over the place. The sax interludes, the bass lines from Stephen Lessard are unbelievable. The drum work, really great, jazzy, interesting. Steve Lillywhite's production, just coaxing the exact right sound out of those acoustic guitars. I believe Dave, and Tim Reynolds would play the song simultaneously. And I believe Lillywhite went mostly with the Tim Reynolds stuff. So, it's mostly Tim Reynolds is what you hear on the guitar, which I didn't know until this week. And I was looking up and all this stuff. But I always thought Dave Matthews was an incredible guitar player. Maybe he's an incredible guitar writer. Tim Reynolds, obviously the better player, but something like Satellite, where he's jumping around in that spacey little riff and jumping strings and stuff, like that's a really cool guitar part. Like that's not something that just anybody was doing in '94. The mixing of Tom Lord Alge, great as well. All the instruments are really well balanced and they sound great in the mix. It definitely isn't too jumbled. It's not too dense, which is hard to do when you're balancing this many elements and this many sounds. And Dave, he's kind of a nerd, but he's also he grew up in South Africa, very vocal anti-apartheid, had a lot of friend. He's from a black area and he had black friends, and he's trying to fight apartheid and all this other stuff, and people feel like he's this like granola eating jam band hippie white dude. And it just always felt unfair to me to label him like that. Jimmy Thing is awesome. I love Warehouse. I love the hits. I love Ants Marching. What Would You Say is awesome. John Popper has an incredible harmonica solo in there. And I think it's more complex and more interesting lyrically than people give this one credit for. He really hadn't developed like that weird like sexual fixation on awkward lyrics yet. So that's a plus. A little more serious here. And when I heard this, like the first time I was blown away. I was like, how can anyone not like this? This sounds amazing. But I don't know. I'll ask Cramser why he hates Dave Matthews so much. Get a insight into it. I guess it's just the vocals, but for me, that cannot ruin what is an amazing sound and a unique sound that this band came up with in 1994.
You're gonna hate this comparison because I'm just thinking it through. You know who else he hated, who was a white led band with several non-white members that were doing this sort of infusion sort of thing in the 70s? Three Dog Night.
Hey, Three Dog Night is not cool though. Well, okay, neither is Dave, but
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Three Dog didn't write their own songs, so totally different.
Hey, they wrote like four of them on side hand, so. But no, I agree. They're a more talented band than the Three Dog Night group, so this is what it is. Number one, though, Under the Table and Dreaming, pretty easily. So the one I was considering buying on vinyl, might do it eventually. We'll see how it goes. This album seriously caught me off guard, however, and just how much I enjoyed it. 4.5 stars for this one as well. No fives for Dave, but I mean, hey, I have like 85s ever out of 2,000 ratings. Who cares? I'm not giving it to somebody who sounds like Dave Matthews Band. No. But in reality, Dave's a fine singer. His acoustic guitar playing, I don't know if it's him or the other guy. Regardless, great stuff. Stefan's shocking bass lines are excellent. Violin parts of Boyd, and the real star of the show, the incredible horn performances by Leroy, really just blew me away. I could say for like the time I was listening to this catalog, he was my favorite musician. Stevie Wonder overtakes that now that I'm not listening to them, but in the moment it was him. To be as transparent as I can say, I thought all of these songs were very, very good. They could be terrible, but I could just listen to this ensemble of musicians play again and again in 1994, and I would not care. And I understand why people do. I understand why they're going to the live shows, why they're getting unrecognizably high at those shows and just jamming out. But yeah, it's just Steve Lillywhite. You have the great production as well. Everything is so crisp. The band feels like they're just in the room with you. laying everything out, just sort of serenading you. You hear Dave singing, it gets awkward, but you get what I'm saying. I don't know. My favorite songs here, The Best of What's Around, Satellite, Ants Marching, Pay for What You Get. It's a great record, and in the incredibly stacked year of 1994, it's up there for one of the better ones. Top 10 for sure in that year, which not a easy feat to do, I would say.
It didn't even make my top five in '94, which is how good that year is. So I don't
That's
know if
surprising,
people maybe didn't know how much I liked that album, but
perhaps.
yeah, it pretty easily. Yeah, there was some bouncing around between Busted Stuff and Crash and Before These Crowded Streets, but there was never a thought to placing anything above Under the Table and Dreaming.
Kind of hard to justify anything above it because that's just such a fully formed, really just excellently executed debut, I suppose. I'm trying to think of bands who really came out of the gate stronger than just them at what they would do for the rest of their career. Because
It's tough to think of like I hate to keep referencing yacht rock, but like Steely Dan, they changed their sound and stuff, but just the level of playing that you get on that first album and the pop songwriting, like it sucks that they never quite got that again. Like I always feel bad being like, oh yeah, the first album was by far the best and everything after it sucked and they got worse every album. But I mean, they just came out of the gate like fully formed, fully ready with some really great pop songs that, hold up really well to this day. I can go back, listen to any of these singles and still really enjoy them.
absolutely. Definitely a bit of a discovery for me. Did not realize I was going to be that high on this group, but hey, more power to it. I always love these discoveries.
We
Uh,
gotta go to Dave's show now.
and maybe. Looking at it now, they're pretty high in just the artists I've done overall. I have a ranking, I believe they're at firmly number 30, which if I remember correctly, it's actually just below the Beatles. So
Don't say that out loud. You gotta cut that part out.
that's the worst about the Beatles here. It's fine. Gotta remember, I like George Solo more. That's what I gotta cut out. That's what I gotta cut out. That being said, though, I hope that you all enjoyed everything. Had a good old jaunt with a good old Dave Matthews Band. Love him or hate him, I kind of see it both ways. I'd say if you're able to get past the voice, though, just tons to enjoy across this catalog. But that being said, this was a fun time, despite the technical difficulties. Ouch. That being said, I hope that everybody enjoyed it and had a great time. But